Karl Marx was not just a philosopher. He was a storm in human thought. He was neither a ruler nor a prophet. Yet half the world was once dictated by his ideas. Born in 1818 in Prussia, what we now call Germany, he saw the early rise of capitalism, not as a triumph of progress, but as a ticking clock of injustice. His writings have inspired revolutions and generated centuries of fierce debate. From Moscow to Havana, from Beijing to Berlin, Karl Marx became scripture and scapegoat. Marx believed the new economic system, capitalism, for all its innovation, was built on exploitation, on turning human labor into commodity, on reducing lives to profits, and convincing workers that productivity was virtue, while leisure, fulfillment, and meaning were distractions. The theft of labor, the chains of capital, in the name of profit, he warned, capitalism would glorify consumption, devalue the soul, and alienate workers from their own labor, from each other, and, ultimately, from themselves. Today, Marx is torn between legacy and heresy. His statues have fallen, but his questions still stand. Are we free, or are we just fuel for someone else's machine? Before he became the architect of communism, Karl Marx was a disillusioned philosopher in 19th century Prussia. Born in Trier in 1818, Marx grew up amid the contradictions of Enlightenment values and political repression. His father, a lawyer and secular Jew, converted to Christianity, not from faith, but necessity. Marx would study law, but it was philosophy that consumed him. And in Berlin, he encountered Hegel, whose idea of dialectics, a process of progress through contradiction, changed everything. But Marx found Hegel too abstract. For Hegel, history was the unfolding of spirit. For Marx, it was the unfolding of class struggle. He grounded the dialectic in the real. Materialism. Life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. Thus emerged dialectical materialism, a view where history is driven not by ideas, but by economic forces, labor relations, and class antagonisms. Marx's writing became politically dangerous. He was exiled from Germany, then France, then Belgium, a man without a homeland, yet reshaping nations. In exile, he met Friedrich Engels, heir to a textile fortune and author of The Condition of the Working Class in England, a searing indictment of industrial exploitation. Together, they co-authored the Communist Manifesto. It would become the most explosive pamphlet in modern history. Marx claimed that in pursuit of profit, capitalists would encourage their ideology that work is good, leisure is bad, and material things will make us happy, embracing mass production, depriving workers of job satisfaction. At the same time, exploiting the working class. It called for the abolition of the class system, the end of private ownership of the means of production, and a world where wealth was shared. Education was free, and human dignity was not a privilege, but a birthright. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Marx was no longer just a thinker. He was the prophet of a proletarian future. Das Kapital. Karl Marx's Das Kapital isn't just a dense economic treatise. It's a diagnosis of the world we live in, and a warning. Marx began writing it during the Industrial Revolution, when cities rose on the backs of factory workers who lived in filth and died in poverty. He wasn't just trying to understand capitalism. He was trying to expose it. It is a dissection table, cold, analytical, merciless. Marx didn't want to imagine a better world. He wanted to expose the one we were already trapped inside. He saw capitalism as a system that, for all its innovation, thrived on exploitation. It turned labor into profit, humans into tools, life into commodities, and Marx's goal was to map it all, piece by piece, law by law, like a scientist studying gravity. What do a smartphone, a loaf of bread, and a hammer have in common? To Marx, they're all commodities, objects produced not just for use, but for exchange. And in every commodity lies a secret. It has two values. I use value, what it does. I exchange value, what it's worth in the market. But that worth, Marx argued, doesn't come from scarcity or desire. It comes from labor, not just any labor, but what he called socially necessary labor time. The average time it takes to produce something under normal conditions. A chair made in 4 hours isn't more valuable than one made in 2. Value doesn't come from effort. It comes from productive effort, aligned with the market. And yet, in capitalism, we forget the labor behind the object. We see the product, not the hands that made it. Marx called this the fetishism of commodities, when we treat objects as if they magically generate value, and forget the workers who make value possible. Before money, people bartered. Bread for shoes, apples for nails, chili for rice. But barter was messy, so we created exchange, and with it, a world where every object could carry a price. Exchange turned goods into relations. Each trade a silent connection between human efforts. The bread you buy, it holds the farmer's sweat. The shirt on your back, it carries the needleworker's time. But in this system, everything becomes a commodity, even the labor itself. Enter money, the universal equivalent, a tool that made trade easier, and a symbol that made exploitation easier to hide. Marx explains that money is not wealth. It's a representation of labor, a placeholder for value created by people. But we treat it as if it creates value on its own. This, he said, is money's great illusion. When we see only the price, we forget the process. When we chase profit, we forget people. Money becomes capital, not just currency, but a force. It buys machines, hires workers, extracts value, generates more money, and repeats. This cycle, Marx warned, is what drives capitalism and what makes it unstoppable until it breaks. Marx didn't believe capitalism could be patched or tamed. Its problems, inequality, crisis, alienation, were not flaws. They were features. Booms and busts aren't accidents. They are rhythms built into the system's logic. Profit must rise. Labor must be cheap. And eventually, contradiction catches up. Fast forward to 2025, and the world Marx described still stands. Gig workers replace factory hands. Billionaires replace kings. Global supply chains replace imperial trade routes. And inequality grows, not despite the system, but because of it. Crashes like 2008, shocks like COVID-19, each one exposes a truth Marx predicted. Capitalism is fragile because it is built on contradiction. You don't have to agree with Marx to see his fingerprints on modern life. He asked, why does labor feel empty? Why does growth leave so many behind? Why do crises repeat? Das Kapital doesn't give you a map to utopia. It gives you a mirror. And once you've looked, you can't unsee it. Marx died in 1883. Only 11 people attended his funeral. He never saw his theory realized. After his death, his ideas flourished. In 1917, his words became weapons. Based on the theory of Marxism came communism, the realization of a stateless society where all are equal. Communism became a global movement, but the utopian ideal of a fair and equal society failed to materialize. Communism tyrannized and impoverished its subjects, and slaughtered them in the tens of millions. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia overthrew the Tsar. Lenin promised the dictatorship of the proletariat. But under Stalin, it became the dictatorship of the state. Totalitarian control replaced revolutionary democracy. Marx spoke of emancipation. Stalin built gulags. In China, Mao Zedong adapted Marxism to a peasant-based revolution. But the Great Leap Forward led to mass famine. The Cultural Revolution erased centuries of heritage. In Cambodia, Pol Pot turned Marxism into genocide. He emptied cities, killed intellectuals, purged the past. In the name of equality, millions perished. No private property became no private life. Collective agriculture became collective death. These regimes did not fulfill Marx's dream, but they claimed his name. And so, the question lingers, was Marx the map or just a match? Marxism failed in its pure form. Marxism began as a vision of liberation, a world without exploitation, where equality reigned. But wherever it took root, It often left behind not utopia, but gulags, famine, and fate. Here are the 6 fundamentals to understand its main failures. Marx's dictatorship of the proletariat became a dictatorship of the party, not temporary, but absolute. The state didn't wither, it bloated. Power didn't dissolve, it concentrated, silencing dissent, rewriting truth, and enforcing loyalty through violence became its legacy. Central planning, hailed as efficient and just, proved blind to human complexity. Innovation withered, shortages soared. Black markets thrived while official economies collapsed under rigidity. Marxism's fatal flaw was idealism about human nature. It assumed that without private property, ego, envy, and ambition would vanish. They didn't. Systems demanded perfection and punished imperfection with terror. Worse, Marxism became dogma. It reduced all history to class, ignoring culture, emotion, and spirit. As Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar noted, it was a theory with one dimension, and humanity has many. In the name of the people, it erased the individual. Rights were political tools, not moral truths. Your voice existed only if it served the cause. And in the end, Marx's belief in inevitable revolution misread history itself. Because human progress isn't a formula, it's a contradiction. Critics like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek argue that without economic freedom, personal liberty dies, while thinkers like Jonathan Chait highlighted Marxism's blindness to individual rights, and Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar exposed its rigid class determinism, all pointing to a theory too narrow, too brittle, to survive the chaos of human reality. And any theory that forgets that eventually breaks. And yet, Marx's diagnosis of capitalism still echoes. Today, the wealth gap isn't just vast, it's grotesque. A trillionaire could soon exist, while billions can't afford enough food. A handful of corporations, tech giants and financial empires, hold more influence than many governments. They don't just sell products, they shape reality. Marx saw this coming. He predicted globalization, the concentration of capital, and the commodification of life. He warned that capitalism, left unchecked, would turn people into products, reduce life to transaction, strip labor of meaning. Who owns what? Who decides value? Who pays the price? Look around. Hustle culture glorifies burnout. Mental health declines. Labor is rebranded as passion, but it still feels like prison. We rejected Marxism, but perhaps we never truly understood it. Not as a manual for revolution, but as a mirror. Capitalism may have endured, but in the shadows of inequality, Marx still whispers, "You have nothing to lose but your chains." The real question is, if freedom feels like chains at your foot, was it ever freedom at all? We can see that Marxism is seriously flawed, but his questions about our lives, workers' rights, and his questions about inequality in the world are still haunting us, yet to be answered by our modern society. If you've made it this far, you're not afraid of deep questions. Please press like and subscribe. Share your thoughts. We ideas are immensely valuable to us. This channel exists for minds like yours, curious, critical, unafraid to challenge dogma. If this sparked thought or discomfort, you're exactly who we make these videos for. Let's think about life deeply and build something better together.